Chuck Norris, a name that refuses to fade, echoing through generations. To millions, he wasn't just an actor. He was invincible. The man who traded blows with Bruce Lee, the unstoppable walker, Texas Ranger, and the very symbol of strength and resilience. But behind that iron image was a boy scarred by fear, heartbreak, and shadows no camera ever captured. Chuck Norris was born Carlos Ray Norris in 1940 in Ryan, Oklahoma. His childhood wasn't filled with laughter, but with survival. His father, a World War II veteran, came home broken by war. Alcohol became his escape, and the Norris family became his prisoners. Every creak of the floorboards, every slammed door, carried the threat of an outburst. For young Chuck, home wasn't safety. It was a battlefield. He once wrote that his father became the role model he swore never to follow. His mother, Wilma, was the real warrior, raising 3 boys with nothing but faith and grit. Chuck remembered her hiding a $5 bill for food, only for his father to snatch it away in a drunken rage. Nights often ended with terror, his father forcing the family into a car, swerving dangerously across the highway, while Wilma begged him to stop. By 14, Chuck couldn't take it anymore. In a moment that burned into his soul, he stood between his father and mother, hammer in hand, ready to defend her. That night, he made a vow. He would never become the man who terrified him. When Wilma finally found the strength to leave, packing up her boys and moving to California, Chuck carried that vow like armor. The scars never healed, but they forged the steel inside him. And soon he would find the one thing that gave him purpose: martial arts. At 18, stationed in South Korea with the U.S. Air Force, Chuck stumbled into a world that would change his destiny forever. Taekwondo, judo, discipline. Here, weakness was shattered and rebuilt as strength. He wasn't the shy, invisible boy anymore. He was becoming someone new. When he returned home in 1962, Chuck carried with him both the discipline of a soldier and a burning obsession with martial arts. He opened his first karate school in California. Most nights the mats were empty, the silence broken only by his own footsteps as he swept the floor. Money was scarce, doubt was constant, but he refused to quit. Because for Chuck, this wasn't just a business. It was survival. It was a future. And soon the world would take notice. By the mid-1960s, Chuck Norris was chasing something bigger than survival. He stepped into karate tournaments, determined to test himself. The results? Brutal defeats. Again and again, he was knocked down, humiliated, left wondering if he would ever be good enough. Each loss echoed the same fear from his childhood, that powerless boy trapped in chaos. But instead of quitting, Chuck went back to the dojo night after night, drilling until his body was no longer clumsy, but sharp as a blade. Between 1964 and 1967, he lost more than he won. Yet those defeats forged him, and in 1967, at just 27, he claimed his first championship. From that moment, the tide turned. Chuck went on to dominate, holding the title of professional middleweight karate champion for 6 straight years. He wasn't just collecting trophies. He was transforming. The frightened boy was gone, replaced by a man defined by iron discipline. He opened karate schools across America, teaching not only strikes and kicks, but values, respect, perseverance, and inner strength. Lessons he had clawed out of his own pain. By the early 1970s, his reputation soared beyond the mat. And in 1972, destiny paired him with Bruce Lee in The Way of the Dragon. Their showdown inside Rome's Colosseum became legendary. Audiences gasped, but behind the scenes, Chuck worried he'd only be remembered as the man Bruce Lee defeated. Instead, his presence lit the screen, and Hollywood couldn't ignore him. Still, his rise in film was far from easy. Competing against giants like Stallone and Schwarzenegger, his career stumbled before finding its ground. Then in 1978, with Good Guys Wear Black, everything changed. America embraced him as the clean-cut, disciplined hero it was waiting for. One film led to another. The Octagon, Lone Wolf McQuade, Missing in Action, Code of Silence, The Delta Force. By the mid-1980s, Chuck Norris wasn't just a martial artist. He was a symbol of patriotism and unyielding justice. But every time he put on a soldier's uniform on screen, his heart broke a little more. Because behind the applause, he carried the unbearable weight of his younger brother's death in Vietnam. Chuck Norris was only 21 when he was killed in action. Chuck admitted, "His death left a hole in my heart that will never heal." The 1980s cemented Chuck as America's action star, but fame came at a cost. Relentless filming schedules, stunt injuries, and long stretches away from family. And yet his resilience carried him forward. In 1993, a new chapter began. Walker, Texas Ranger. For 8 seasons, Chuck became Cordell Walker, the lawman whose fists of justice and unwavering morality became a global phenomenon. The show aired in over 100 countries, and Chuck's name became a synonym for invincibility. Children saw him as their hero. Adults admired his calm strength. Even jokes and memes only deepened his legend. But beneath the spotlight, grief never left him. Because Whelan's story didn't fade, it only grew heavier with time. Whelan wasn't just Chuck's brother. He was the light in a dark home, the laughter in rooms shadowed by their father's drinking. But Whelan carried a haunting belief. He once told Chuck he didn't think he'd live past 27. It sounded like youthful melancholy until 1970 proved it tragically true. While on patrol in Vietnam, Whelan spotted the enemy lying in wait. His warning cries saved his comrades, but cost him his own life. Just 21 years old. His act of courage was the ultimate sacrifice, leaving behind a wound that fame, fortune, and applause could never mend. And for Chuck, every victory in Hollywood was shadowed by that single truth. His greatest role was never on screen. It was surviving the pain that tried to break him. For Chuck, who had spent his career playing warriors on screen, this was a heroism too real and heartbreaking for any script to match. The telegram shattered the Norris family. Their mother, who had already carried them through poverty and violence, now faced the cruelty of outliving her son. Chuck admitted this loss carved a wound in his soul no fame or applause could ever heal. In the 1980s, while audiences cheered his victories on screen, he lived a private tragedy. Every time he picked up a rifle or filmed a battle scene, he was reliving Van's ghost. War hadn't just taken his brother, it stole Chuck's peace forever. Whelan's death became the shadow behind every smile, the silent burden in every triumph. For Chuck, Van wasn't just a sibling, but a piece of himself torn away. Yet in that grief, he found strength. If Van could give his life, Chuck would carry his memory forward. His films became more than entertainment. They were tributes to resilience and courage. Audiences saw a man who looked invincible, but behind that steel was a brother's love and a wound that never closed. But life wasn't done testing him. In 1958, at just 18, Chuck married his high school sweetheart, Diane Holacek. For 3 decades, she was his anchor as they raised 2 sons, Mike and Eric. But fame and constant travel strained the marriage until, in 1988, it collapsed. For Chuck, it was a devastating shock, leaving him adrift and his sons watching their home unravel. Then came another revelation, a letter from a young woman named Dina, born in 1962, who revealed she was his daughter from a brief relationship during his service. She had grown up without him, her mother keeping the truth hidden. Meeting her brought both blessing and regret. He saw his face in hers and felt crushed by guilt for the years lost. Though they built a bond, the regret of absence never left him. As if grief and heartbreak weren't enough, another cruel blow struck. Not family this time, but friendship. In the late 1980s, Chuck grew close to Lee Atwater, a rising political strategist whose energy seemed unstoppable. They became true friends, sharing laughter and trust. But in 1990, Atwater collapsed during a speech. Doctors diagnosed an inoperable brain tumor. He was only 39. Chuck was devastated. Visiting him in those final months, he saw the once brilliant man fade. He later recalled kissing Lee's forehead, then walking out and breaking down in tears. Watching a vibrant friend unravel so quickly was a cruelty even a warrior couldn't fight. In March 1991, just a year after his collapse, Lee Atwater died at only 40. For Chuck, it was not just the loss of a friend, but the collapse of an illusion, that charisma, strength, or brilliance could shield anyone from mortality. If it could happen to him, it could happen to me, Chuck admitted later. The realization stripped away the last layers of invincibility he had once believed in. Fame, applause, trophies, all seemed fleeting in the shadow of a life cut short. For a man who had built his legend on triumph, Lee's death was a mirror, reminding him that life is heartbreakingly fragile. Yet even in sorrow, Chuck drew resolve to live with purpose, to cherish those he loved, and to understand that true strength was not about never falling, but about valuing every moment before it slipped away. If losing his brother had scarred him, if losing his marriage had shaken him, and if losing his friend had forced him to face mortality, nothing compared to the day he realized his greatest battle would be fought not on screen or in a ring, but at the bedside of his beloved wife. After years of loneliness, Chuck found happiness again with Gina Kelly, a former model he married in 1998. She was 23 years younger, a radiant presence who reignited his joy at 58. In 2001, they welcomed twins Dakota and Danielle, and for more than a decade, their home was filled with the laughter Chuck had long craved. But in 2013 came the cruelest twist. Gina underwent what should have been a routine MRI scan, only for the gadolinium dye to trigger what doctors later recognized as gadolinium deposition disease. Almost overnight, her body trembled, her limbs weakened, her voice faltered. The woman Chuck adored was slipping into a nightmare. Chuck spent countless nights at her bedside, holding her hand as machines hummed, praying through tears as words became harder for her to speak. More than $2 million went into treatments, but nothing could restore her health. "She's dying right in front of me," he confessed, his voice breaking. Fans still saw the indestructible hero of Walker, Texas Ranger, but at home he was a husband in despair, pacing hospital corridors, giving up his career, retreating from Hollywood to devote himself entirely to her care. For Gina, once radiant and independent, the illness was crushing, worsened by the guilt of seeing Chuck sacrifice everything. For their twins, then only 12, childhood was marked by hospital visits and the sight of their father's tears, a memory that would forever shape their view of love and fragility. The years that followed were a relentless battle of experimental treatments and desperate journeys for answers, including a trip to China for stem cell therapy. Yet through every setback, Chuck refused to surrender. The discipline forged in the dojo became the fuel for a far more sacred fight. He was no longer the warrior on screen, but the warrior at home, measuring victory not in trophies, but in his unyielding devotion. And in this, the world began to see a different Chuck Norris. Stripped of the armor of invincibility, he revealed true strength, not the kind that defeats enemies, but the kind that kneels beside a suffering loved one and whispers, "I'm not leaving." At 85, Chuck lives quietly with Gina on their ranch in Navasota, Texas, a sprawling sanctuary where horses roam and spring water flows, bottled into his Seaforce brand. His fortune, valued at $70 million, is the product of decades of triumphs. But wealth cannot erase memories or buy back time. Every acre of that ranch echoes with the shadows of his brother Van, his first wife Diane, his daughter Dina's lost childhood, his friend Lee Atwater, and Gina's suffering. Time has softened his once iron frame, slowed his martial arts, and turned applause into silence. Yet he has found one final lesson. True invincibility is not never breaking, it is rising after you do. He continues to support causes like Kickstart Kids, the program he founded in 1990 to give at-risk children the same discipline and hope martial arts gave him. His battles now are quieter, but no less important. To the world, Chuck Norris remains a symbol of strength. To his family, he is a guardian, a husband, and a father who gave up everything for love. And to himself, he is simply a man who has learned that even legends must bow to time. But that love, devotion, and dignity can turn even the darkest years into light. If Chuck Norris has ever inspired you, if his triumphs and tragedies have touched your heart, honor him now. Leave a like as a tribute to a man who carried not only the blazing glory of fame, but also the heaviest sorrows of life, and proved that the greatest force on earth is love itself.